Like there was always this, feeling that I'm in the wrong career. I was always pursuing, side hustles. Of starting over is really, really scary. It's almost like having to even like put your ego away too, right? Because you're like, you know what you're doing here, and then now you're going somewhere and you're like, I don't really know a lot and I need to learn again. A lot of it is also just confidence, and a lot of that confidence should come from quantitative data or qualitative data. What's great about UX is like you can come from any field, because the more diverse the background, more unique the solving of the problem will be.
Thank you so much for joining us today for our Journey to Success series. I am so excited to have you on this episode. It is a wonderful, wonderful contribution. I would love if you could actually walk us through your journey and start us off with a little bit about what's inspired you to pursue the career that you're in UX design, and how did you actually break into the field itself?
Hi everyone, I am Sana Maqsood. I am a UX designer, a founder, and an artist. And so kind of going back to where it all began. So originally in undergrad, I actually studied architecture, and I was in this, really great program. And, I always knew that I was a creative and wanted to be in some sort of creative field. But being in a really intensive architecture program, it was pretty tough. And at the time, I was 18. I didn't have anyone that was super successful in that field that I could look up to, ask questions around. And so, as much as it felt like it was the right space for me, I ended up leaving architecture school. And then, I was like, okay, well, thinking about, being 18, I'm like, what can I do that I'm really good at? And I was always really good with numbers. So I ended up going to DePaul University to get a degree in finance. So I ended up graduating from DePaul in Chicago with a finance degree. And right after I graduated, I moved out to San Francisco and worked in the financial services sector. So I landed an amazing job at NASDAQ and was there for, 2 years, and kind of worked in, account management and, as mentioned, like financial services. But, like the fact that I always left a creative industry, like there was always this, feeling that I'm in the wrong career. I was always pursuing, side hustles of, at the time, which was styling and photography, and things like that. So, like my outside life had that creativity, but my day job didn't. And so I ended up, I think then I ended up kind of stumbling across UX, and this was back in 2016. And so in San Francisco, I found this, program through UC Berkeley Extension, which which was all about UX design. And at the time, I feel like it was still like new, the field, like it wasn't super saturated. And so I started taking classes. And I remember the first class I ever took, one of my professors says, architecture is the gateway drug to UX design. And I thought it was so like serendipitous, and it almost felt like this field that I left and I regretted leaving because working in finance, I was really lacking that creativity. Maybe I'm finding the right place. So that's kind of how my journey started. So from there, while I was still working in finance, I was at Thomson Reuters at the time then, I was taking all of these UX design courses. So it took me over 2 years where I learned UX, user research, ideation and prototyping. I learned UI. I learned how to create a portfolio. And I started essentially, building an online presence of my UX work. And, kind of started to figure out how I can best move into it. So at Thomson Reuters, I started doing a little bit of UX work with the help of, I found an amazing mentor who was the head of design innovations. And she's one of, my greatest friends today. And she kind of really helped supported me from that transition officially from finance into UX. And that's kind of how it started. And so obviously the rest is history. I think it's been eight years since then, if not more. And, been loving the UX field. So.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing. And I I love the stark comparison. I love when you hear of people going from like a journey, like you said, like finance, and then into something so completely different. I love it because there's such like growth. There's such an interesting journey. There's so much like self exploration that happens with it. So that's amazing. So I would also, just to be nosy, I'd love to know. You mentioned that you're into art as well. Is there a particular art form?
Yeah, no, I'd love to talk about it. So I recently completed my master's in from New York University in integrated digital media in May. And for my master's thesis, I explored the concept of different biosensors, specifically brainwaves data. And I use brainwaves data and produce installation art. So I produce visuals and sound. I recently had like a massive show in Greenpoint, in like a tattoo shop and a gallery. So I've been heavily like focusing on my art as well. And what's interesting about the biosensor space is it's taking UX and taking it one step further, because UX is this understanding of what is the human psychology of how people interact with technology. With the biosensors, it's like, what do our body functions tell us about people, and how can we create better experiences? And that's essentially kind of this new world. Obviously, it's more physical products that I'm working on, installation arts and things like that. But it's still kind of in that same realm if you think about it. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And also that sounds so interesting. I can't even bring myself to imagine what the installations look like, but that sounds phenomenal. That sounds absolutely phenomenal. And I love very like sort of neo art forms where you do see things like that. I mean, like there are like light installations that are controlled by like people's heartbeats and things like that, and like the light straight. I think stuff like that is phenomenal. Art is such a beautiful thing, so that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that added detail. I mean, along your professional journey though, what's led you to your current role as a senior UX designer, and what have been some of your key milestones along that journey?
Yeah, so kind of going back, so as mentioned, Thomson Reuters was kind of like when I started to break into UX. After that, I ended up going to Afterpay, which I was the first designer in the US. And they were just starting to build like their US presence. It's basically an Australian company. And again, this was before their acquisition to Block. And then from Afterpay, I worked at First Republic Bank, which is a really interesting too. That was during the time of COVID, so they were changing up their design drastically, because everything they did was in person and they wanted to move to digital. And then kind of brings me to where I am today. So after First Republic Bank, I moved over to Amazon. So I've been at Amazon for the last, I think 4 years, if not more. So I'm currently today a senior designer at Amazon. Been here for a while. And yeah, like I think like, the transition over was, I had it a little bit easy, I would say, because I transitioned in a time where the market wasn't super saturated. I also think obviously it was way before COVID started. And, I had the right mentorship. I had the right, projects on my portfolio. And I think one big thing for how I got to where I am is, I built on top of my financial experience. So even though I was starting as a new designer, it wasn't that I was ever junior. I was building upon this, professionalism and experience that I had, and I story told in a way where I was still very, mid-level, and it kind of helped me get to where I am. I think what's also really interesting and that I didn't really speak about, in that journey, I did also start a company called Maqsood, which was, focused on gender neutral jewelry and clothing. And what's been really great is some of the experience I've had is actually kind of relevant to starting a business. And so at Afterpay, is a payments company for businesses to be able to, provide flexibility. They integrate with Shopify. Me being a merchant, I'm on Shopify. And then today, I work for a team called Buy with Prime, which enables merchants to have Prime shipping. So same concept. So it's interesting because there's all these serendipitous moments in my journey where, the architecture and then even just like starting a company, like that was purely for myself and wanting to do something in the fashion space. And that even ended up like really helping me out, land where I am today. And so I think, it's one of those things where I kind of followed my heart in all of these ways and they ended up like really helping me get to, where I am. So
Yeah, no, I love that because, in a sense, because of what you're doing and because your interests follow with your career as well, so your jewelry brand, in a sense, you've kind of described it as though it's like a really small world, even though it's such a massive scheme. And it's so many different platforms and players, but that's phenomenal. That's incredible. I adore the concept of gender neutral jewelry, by the way. That sounds phenomenal. So looking back more so at your career pathway so far, what is maybe one of the biggest challenges that you faced and how did you sort of encourage yourself and drive yourself to overcome that?
Yeah, I would say like transitioning from finance to design was pretty difficult. And so I think that transition, a big part of why that transition was successful for me was finding a really, really good mentor. And so that's something where I am actively mentoring. I am also, one thing we didn't discuss, I am a professor at NYU teaching UX design.
Wow. How are you finding the time to do all of these
I,
things?
uh, I love being in design. As you can see, I've had my toes dipped in it for a while. But I think just kind of going back to that, like that support, that mentorship, and that teaching was exactly what helped me get into design. So that's why I'm a big advocate of if I can provide that to other students today, I will do it. So I think like the biggest for me, and again, because I had 4 years, or I think it was like 4 to 5 years of experience, starting over is really, really scary, and going into a field where you're like, okay, I know something, I'm getting paid really well. And now all of a sudden this doesn't feel right. And I want to pivot. But then this concept of like going back to zero is really tough. It's almost like having to even like put your ego away too, right? Because you're like, you know what you're doing here. And then now you're going somewhere and you're like, I don't really know a lot and I need to learn again. So that was really tough. But I also think like, the biggest thing for me was like that mentorship that I had, which was, the head of design innovations at Thomson Reuters. She helped me tremendously through that transition because she would essentially mentor me, guide me, kind of have me look at projects in ways that I never did. And again, you're only as smart as the folks around you, right? And if you're a solo designer and if you don't have good support system around you, you're not going to know what you don't know. And so I was really grateful for that. But also, I think I also had like a great manager at the time who was allowing me to like do projects at Thomson Reuters in UX to build up my portfolio. So I had real world projects on my portfolio. Yeah. And I think the other thing is just storytelling, right? I told my story in a way where, hey, I'm not a junior designer breaking into this industry. I have, 4 to 5 years of finance experience. And now I have design built on top of that. And I think that's why my first job was in a company, which is a payments company. So it was a fintech company. So it actually made a lot of sense because, I have the background in finance and then now I had the background in UX. So again, I think they also recognized me as someone who wasn't a junior designer coming in, but someone who's mid-level and can do other elements of the job too. So, and I think, that's super relevant for today, even if someone isn't transitioning industries. I think just breaking into UX design can be really, really daunting. A lot of UX design interviews require, a really well-crafted portfolio, which, can take months to create, which is online portfolio, which is separate, and then a physical portfolio, which is obviously separate too. Both of those are going to be very different. The storytelling is going to be different. And then, you have really intense interviews around like whiteboarding challenges, app critiques, and, just like obviously behavioral interviews too. So I think all of those, like it takes, practice, it takes mentorship, it takes guidance, and it takes a really good, almost just way to tell a good story in those interviews. So, but yeah, I still struggle with it today. Interviews are tough for even me. So, but yeah, I think like a lot of good people around me to kind of get to where I am. So,
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. That's actually really interesting because obviously I can imagine that the biggest challenge being making such a significant shift, and absolutely that feeling that you described of like starting over is something that is such a deterrent for so many people. Like they would rather stick to, like the phrase of like the devil like rather the devil than the one you don't, because it's rebuilding, it is starting from scratch, is building a different network, it's a complete different understanding. But it's so obvious that you can see so much value in mentorship and like coaching and guidance, but like how did you actually muster up the courage to then make that jump, considering it is such a big challenge?
yeah, I think for me, it was like baby steps. Like, I remember even in like the first classes I took, like, I was like, oh, I'm doing this because, I was going to school in the evenings at the time and I was still working in finance. And I was like, yeah, I'm doing this, but am I actually doing it? Like, am I actually going into it? And so that's why, like, for me, it took me 2 years to do that program, because I was totally new to design. And so it was like I needed to build those building blocks of like understanding design. And so I think each class I took, each project I did, as got the mentor, it just helped me build confidence. And again, I think, if someone was coming from a graphic design background into UX, it's a little bit better. For me, it was like worlds apart. Finance to design, like it's just such a drastic difference. Unless,
Absolutely.
obviously, if you work in the finance world for UX, right? But I think baby steps, like it was baby steps, right? Like each thing would help me. Like the more I would learn, the more confident I would get, the mentorship I would get, the more projects I would practice my skill, I would get better.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you. It's just something that's so like interesting to understand, because I think it would benefit a lot of people to know that, because so many people, like we said, just kind of like, no, actually that's terrifying, so it's better to stay here. So it's great advice. I mean, now you are such a well-versed UX designer, you're like, you've got so much depth in the field. What would you say are some of the most essential skills for a UX designer, especially in a really fast-paced and innovative environment like Amazon?
Yeah. I would say, and I think like if you're an IC, or like manager too, it's different. But let's just talk about like as an IC, so individual contributor. I would say, we talked about this a little bit, storytelling, so I won't cover it too much. That's super, super important. Storytelling is also really important when it comes to, sharing your work, and speaking about your work to stakeholders, and product partners and engineering. And so another thing that comes into play is just like confidence. Like, I meet a lot of designers who are super, super talented, but another element of it is having really great soft skills, because your designs are great on, presentations and paper, but you're going to have to get into a room of leadership and stakeholders and pitch your work on why this needs to be shipped, or, have a backbone against, maybe if engineering is pushing against that work. So I think a lot of it is also just confidence. And a lot of that confidence should come from quantitative data or qualitative data. You should be able to know like who your user is, why this is important. And if anyone, like, again, that confidence is not because this is what you think you want to build. It's because the users really need it. And if you can share the reason why and have a really good, deep understanding to why this feature or functionality is important, that's going to help you with that confidence. So I think just having really good like rationale behind your, why you think you need to push for something. And then I would say another, obviously, I think this is like the crux, like the main part of what UX is just like being very user-centric, right? Like removing all biases, removing all of your own assumptions. I think it's okay to have assumptions, but making sure you are checking them at the door and validating that this is what the user actually is assuming or wanting. So I think just like at the the main of it all is just like being very user centric. And yeah, I think, what's great about UX is like you can come from any field. And I actually think it's amazing when people have diverse backgrounds, because the more diverse the background, to me, I'm like the more unique the solving of the problem will be. So like for me, I come from a finance background. Business strategy and thinking about profit and how everything impacts the business is very natural to me. And so because of that, the way I problem solve versus someone who comes from maybe a traditional design background is drastically different, but very amazing to have on a team where, then that way we're looking at problems completely different and we have different, ways on how to attack it. So I think, that's the best part about design. Like you don't need to have a traditional design background. I actually think regardless of your background, you can definitely be, an asset as a UX designer.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think also like the element of confidence is so important. I think that's one thing that maybe we overlook, because you're right, you can build on those hard skills and anyone can develop any hard skill that they may need to, but that soft skill of being confident in yourself to go forward and pitch yourself and explain it, it is unparalleled, because I feel like people perceive your work so differently as well when you come across and you're like, I need it like this because it's going to benefit like this. It's a whole different messaging.
Yeah,
Um,
100%. Yeah, because as you get more senior, it's a lot of you being, the thought leader and thinking about the strategy. And like a lot of that is just like meetings and like, like showing up as a leader. And so that's less of actually executing on the design and more of actually being, that voice of the customer. So.
yeah, absolutely. No, thank you very much for sharing that. That's amazing. So, what sort of advice would you give to somebody who actually wants to get into UX design specifically? And maybe it's in a big tech company or maybe it's a smaller one, but I think there's always a lot more stages when it comes to larger organizations.
Yeah. I would say like, obviously depending on what stage they're at, thinking about maybe, I went to school, and I got my master's in design. A master's isn't necessarily needed. You can totally learn UX. So having somewhat of a strategy of like, how are you learning UX? And I think there's lots of routes to that, but it's not about where you're learning UX, it's how you apply it. So having then a strategy around like, okay, how am I going to apply this? How am I going to get real world projects on my resume and portfolio? Because mock projects will get you so far, but you really actually need, real world projects. And how you can get that is, hackathons, reaching out to non-for-profits you believe in, just kind of reaching out and be like, hey, can I redo your website? Can I, work on something for you? And I did a lot of that as well. And so again, having the right kind of projects on your portfolio. And then when you're thinking about your portfolio and projects, if Amazon or Meta is the type of company you want to go work for, really honing in on having projects on your portfolio that solve problems that Meta and Amazon would want, right? So if you're looking at Meta, you want to make sure you have maybe some I don't know, like social media component, right? Like if you're interested in Instagram, maybe redesigning Instagram or, looking at other social media apps or things like that. Or maybe if it's like around Facebook Messenger, having some sort of messaging redesign or app functionality. If it's Amazon, then maybe having functionality around retail. So again, being very specific. If you're like, oh, I really want to be in a certain industry, having that type of work on your portfolio will really help, because when you get into the interviewing phase, if you have consumer work that's mobile, and that's, retail, then great. That would be great for you to be able to show. So I think it's really important that you're asking yourself the questions of like, what type of problems are you interested in solving? What type of, device is that, mobile, desktop? What type of industry are you interested in? And then, like what is, as mentioned earlier, like what is your game plan on learning UX? And then what is your game plan on practicing? And then what is your game plan on how you're going to get the proper projects? And then obviously, we talked about this a little bit, mentorship. With mentorship, my advice is I had maybe one or two, I think I think having too many mentors may get confusing. So I think advice for everyone is find one or two that you're like, you really are inspired by where they work, what type of work they're doing, and really kind of work with them closely and meet with them, once a month. Because then they can kind of guide you as you transition from student to, someone who's building a portfolio to someone who's interviewing. And then even someone who is like, I need help with negotiations. I need help with things after. So like that mentorship can continue even once you land that job. So, but yeah, lots of phases. I know it sounds very overwhelming. Break it up. Take it slow. Like I took it slow. I think that's something to remind everyone too. And obviously be easy on yourselves too, because, the market is tough. And kind of know that sometimes it could also be just like the day and age today and how tough it is. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is such a competitive market. It's not necessarily about skill set. Sometimes it's just the name and the face that appears at the right point. Like sometimes it can literally just be about timing as well. But like where you reference the idea of sort of mentoring and coaching and how that can be something that's really beneficial for people. Like I would just love to know, like as a sideline of how you found the transition of having the mentorship and now offering it to people. It must be quite a unique experience seeing both sides of it.
Yeah, so I still have a mentor today. I think everyone should have one regardless of what phase they are in their life. So I don't think I'll ever not stop wanting mentorship. Like I think that's regardless of wherever I am. So, but I actually have been mentoring for the last 3 to 4 years. So I was mentoring through Amazing Design People List, which is another great organization to find great mentors through. And, again, it's free of cost, which is wonderful. It's just people wanting to help people. And then I was also mentoring through Springboard, which is actually, 1 year UX boot camp. So I was reviewing, students' work. And then now, obviously, being a professor at NYU, teaching and mentoring is I'm currently teaching an augmented reality and UX design class. But
Wow.
I think for me, like, I love working at Amazon and I love working in industry, but there's something so beautiful about mentorship and teaching and things like that is feeling that you're doing something way more than yourself that I don't necessarily get when I work, at Amazon and building products. And I think that's the same reason why, like, management is probably the route that I'm, moving into as well. So I just think there's a beauty in helping others rise above and pushing them to really do inspire them to do the work than myself. So I think that's just more so of like a personal preference too. So.
No, and I love that because I think it's such an, like, obviously, not only have you had a very unique journey, but the concept of sharing success is so important because that's what helps, like, fuel the next generation to also find their interests and find their passions and pursue them as well. Especially because it's such a fast changing world. What was done 10 years ago, gosh, I don't think you can say that now. What was done 10 years ago, you wouldn't be able to follow the exact same methodology now. We're that much more digitally evolved, processes are so different, even like culture and like demeanor is so different as well. So we have to adapt. So I think it's lovely that like you've taken your own lessons and you're sharing that out. That's phenomenal.
Thank you.
Oh, no,
Thank
of course. So also looking at the future of things, how do you see the future of UX design evolving? And what could like future designers, aspiring designers potentially do to focus on staying relevant and ahead of those things?
Yeah. So just to kind of talk about that, obviously I just shared a little bit. I teach an augmented reality and UX class, and part of that is like, a little bit like, right, the future, or, like I think AR still has room to grow and still has room to really kind of become bigger. But kind of just talking about the future, I think UX is, if you just think about it, plain blank, is just problem solving in a way, with a process where we're keeping the user in mind. And I think that's something that can easily go to any type of technology. And so I think as, the future, as these new technologies, obviously AI and, XR and VR and all of these things kind of come to fruition, it's less about, what the technology is, but keeping that mindset in place of like, what are we doing here, regardless of like what that medium is, right? So, as the future evolves, like, mediums are going to change and we're obviously going to learn a lot, but keeping in mind, like, we're problem solving in a way where we're really thinking about the user and iterating and kind of creating something wonderful that they need. And so I think, there is going to be change in technology, but regardless, this thinking will always be there. So just really having that deeply rooted in you is important, I would say.
That's actually quite interesting, because how do you strike a balance between the shift in innovation and what's available, whether it's AR, like etc., and still maintaining, okay, let's leverage this, but also keeping that customer focus, because that must be such a fine balance. At the same time, you're supposed to leverage one for the other.
I use AI tools. I actually think it helps my job a lot better. I just think it's not necessarily, it's just about like all of these tools are going to help make our jobs better. So it's all about learning how to use them and so that we can be more efficient. So I think it's less of a balance. I think it's naturally going to be a part of our day to day. And so how can we just best learn how to interact with them so that we can get even more efficient and produce even more, essentially. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the same case on how like AI is used across the board in particular. Like even in what I do, like seeing with content, you see all the time, like you can definitely use it for inspiration and shaping and guiding. And it offers so much benefit, but it's one of those things that you have to use like with caution and like love it gently, basically, so you're not overkilling it.
100%. And I think it's about like editing, right? Editing and editing
Always.
over and over again. So
Always, yeah. It's never a finished product. I mean, I would also just love to know if you've had any projects that you like have you ever had one that is your ultimate favorite, that you're like, this is my baby, like this is the thing, that this is why I did UX, this is my thing.
I think more than anything, I'm in love with my current project, which is my installation art piece.
Okay.
So, and so I think that's just been such a cool space to explore, because essentially I'm looking at neuroscience and incorporating art. And so that was really, really interesting because I ran like a lot of focus groups with different artists to understand, what should the physical experience be when someone, picks up this headset. What do they do? Do they put it on? Do they get instructions from there? What happens after? So it was interesting because it was a little switch in my normal way of UX thinking, but also thinking about like, how it's almost like service design, and service design is how do people interact with technology in physical life. So another example of that could be like an ATM design. How do people pull out their phone or their credit card and use an ATM, and how do you design that? So I would say like my thesis right now it's just been so much fun. I'm exploring other biosensors as well as similar to actually there is like it focuses on sweat glands or on goosebumps, because again all of these are indicators of some kind of excitement, or it's more than just you're cold. It's like, oh, when you hear a really good song you get goosebumps, and that's like this excitement almost. So I think this has been like really beautiful new world. And also again, even though it feels like it's not UX, there is again that very close similarities on how do we really understand people and build better experiences. So I think it's been like taking my UX experience to a whole nother level.
Yeah, no, I mean, like I said before, that sounds like such a phenomenal project. The immersive experience around it must be incredible. So it's fascinating to think about like UX experience, like the user experience from such a multifaceted level, like from what you're hearing, what you're feeling, what you're like seeing, what you're touching. Like that's really well rounded. I love that.
Yeah, and as mentioned, I had a show on Thursday, and what's magical is this is an installation art piece that people get to try on. So there's two headsets. Users come in to the space. We normally have mats on the floor, and what's beautiful is like you'll see couples, you'll see strangers, you'll see friends, how they sit, how if they lay, if they hold hands. It's just so magical how they interact. And again, the data is processing in real time right in front of them, and it's projected all around them. So it's just also very beautiful to see, these like magical moments that are happening between people, and even like the different types of relationships of folks that are coming in and how they're interacting with the technology. So
Yeah.
it's been really eye-opening to kind of be able to enjoy that.
Oh no, I can imagine. That must be incredible. Um, Moving on, I can't believe I'm already at my last question for you, which is insane because it's flown by. But I'm so intrigued to know what your perception is of how would you define success?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So I think success is so subjective. Obviously, to everyone, it's completely different things. For me, success was like projects that I worked on that I was like, that I could see someone else do it and be like, wow, that's so cool and so inspiring, and that I'm able to do. So, like my master's thesis, I think this is something that, like, I know if I saw someone else do it, I'd be super impressed by it. And the fact that I was able to do it, I think that's super successful for me to achieve. I think success is also working on projects that are actually doing good in the world. So for me, achieving a title of being a professor at NYU, to me, I'm like, I'm really actually doing something great in the world where I'm able to educate and, help the next generation of designers. And I would say just like success is, being happy in what you're doing, right? Like, I think back to, ideally when I was working in finance, I worked at great companies, getting a great salary. But, that level of just happiness and contentness wasn't there. So for me, success was finding UX and being super happy in it. And kind of like, obviously success in the, just plain blank, like obviously making it at Amazon and things like that. But I think it's so much more than that. It's like the type of work you do, the type of people you spend your work days with, and the impact it has. It's more about that. And I think that's where, design has really become such a big part of my life, and not just like my day to day and not in my just like work life, but also my personal. So to me, I'm like, okay, that's success because I'm really enjoying what I'm doing. And there's just this constant motivation for me to keep going. And, it's not based off of a dollar amount. It's more so because I'm really proud of like the work I'm doing too. And I can see making a difference.
No, absolutely. And thank you for sharing because it's such a personal question, but I love to ask it because people take such unique journeys and such different journeys, but it sort of shifts the way that we perceive things. And I think, like, so many people say when they join the series, like, how I would have answered this 5 years ago is completely different to the answer I have now.
Yeah.
But people also generally have such a holistic view of it, and that they want to create change and that they want to make a difference. And I think it's just so wonderful to see how people have crafted their own career pathways, but then the investment that they're placing in returning that back out there. I think that's so wonderful. So thank you.
Thank you.
No, that's okay. I mean, I'm actually really gutted that we're already at the end because I feel like I could sit here and ask you 1,000 more questions about your art, about your journey. But I am so grateful to you for giving me your time and sharing your journey with us at Unlimit and everyone else that will watch this episode, because your journey is so phenomenal. Still, how you're managing to juggle so many things is beyond me, but it's so inspiring to see, and it is like the true epitome of like a journey to success. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. This was super enjoyable. And yeah, I had a great time. Thank you so much.